Hello, hey y'all. Hello, hello, hello. It's fantastic to talk to you today. I have a secret that I have been holding for years and years and years, and you are going to be the first to find out this secret. And the secret that I'm going to tell you today is how you can avoid paying too much for a house. How you can avoid ever paying too much for a property, paying too much for an investment house, paying too much for a primary house. How you can absolutely, with total certainty, avoid paying too much for a property. Because a lot of ladies that I talk to, that is their number one fear. They're terrified that they're going to make a bad investment, or they're scared silly that they're going to pay too much for a property and they're going to be overloaded, overwhelmed, underwater. They're going to owe more than it's worth. They're going to go through their entire life savings trying to get out of this problem, and they're absolutely paralyzed with fear. And it boils down to the money, and it boils down to, how do I know if I'm paying too much? What if I pay too much? It's just a crazy whirlwind, a downward spiral into, oh my God, my life is ruined. I've paid too much for this property. I see it happening all the time. And I've been living with a secret for a long, long time, because when I got started in real estate, I was a young lady. I very much loved making my people proud of me. I loved being the smart one. I loved making good decisions. I loved being on the right side of every deal that I was going to get myself into. I loved being the hero. I did not like being in trouble. I did not like the idea that maybe I would pay too much for a property. I did not like any of those situations. They felt bad, and I wanted to be a good girl. Well, I paid too much for a property. I did. I paid too much for the first house that I ever bought at auction. I paid too much for the second house that I ever bought from a for sale by owner. Honest to goodness truth, y'all, I paid too much. And I'm going to tell you how you can avoid paying too much. And one of the things that hurt my feelings the most, and one of the worst phrases that I heard when I was getting started, was confirmation that I paid too much. And I was getting a hint from my people, from my family, from my mom, from my dad, from my uncle, probably from my brother too, that I paid too much. I was getting some huge hints from those people that I'd paid too much, right? But when I left the closing table from the second house that I bought, which ended up, turns out, because I didn't get it inspected, but turns out that house was falling down a mountainside. Also turned out that that house was built prior to central heat and air being a normal part of building a house. First house I bought was falling down a mountainside. It did not have central heat and air, and I didn't realize that houses were built without central heat and air. I mean, come on, y'all. I'm a millennial. In my world, houses aren't built without central heat and air, but it turns out there were houses being built before central heat and air was invented. And I bought one. And I paid too much for that house. That house also had old pipes. It had old tube and knob electric. I paid too much for that house. And I spent the next 18 months flipping that house. And I paid too much for the flipping on that house. But even though I had an idea that I'd paid too much, and even though I didn't want to pay too much, and even though I figured out how to make it happen, and even though I took entirely too long to flip that house, and I paid too much for that because time is money and all those things, it didn't hit me until I was leaving the closing table on that house, and the seller's granddaughter's husband shook my hand, and the granddaughter hugged my neck, and they both laughed at me at the closing table after we'd signed the properties, after I'd given them my brother's entire life savings, because we spent my life savings on the first house we bought, but I spent my brother's life savings on the second house we bought, and I paid too much for both of them. The seller's granddaughter, who was handling the estate, and her husband both laughed at me at closing and said, "Man, I'm so glad you bought this house, because nobody else in town offered us nearly as much money as you did." Oh my God. Oh, y'all, it hurt. It hurt so bad. They didn't say it in a short little phrase, but they were like a dagger into my heart saying, "You paid too much." That's basically what they said. They said, "Nobody else in town offered us nearly as much money as you did, and we're so glad you bought it." I mean, they practically said, "Well, aren't you the dumbass? Aren't you a stupid new investor? Aren't you an idiot? You paid way too much for this property. Nobody else even offered us half of what you offered us. Clearly, you don't know what you're doing." Is basically, I mean, that's how I heard it. The words they said were, "I'm so glad you bought this property because nobody else offered us nearly as much." But, I mean, y'all tell me. In my crazy girl brain, I heard it as, "You paid too much." I interpreted it as, "You're a flippin' idiot. What is wrong with you? Why would you ever pay that much for this property?" I could feel them laughing at me, saying, "We wouldn't even pay that much for that property. I mean, it's falling down a mountainside," which they knew and I didn't. "It doesn't even have central heat and air," which they knew and I didn't. I paid too much. I know I paid too much because nobody else in town offered them nearly as much as I offered them, and I thought I was down to the nubs. I thought I was making a super low offer. I offered them like $25,000 or something for this house, and I think we actually closed for like $20,000 plus closing costs. It was like $22,000 that we paid for that house, and nobody offered nearly as much money as I did. Those were the words they told me, which basically means I paid too much, because every other investor in town knew what they were looking at. Every other investor in town had already made them low offers, probably offered them four figures, maybe offered them $9,000 and I offered them $20,000. Maybe other investors offered them $12,000, but I thought, well, every house has got to be worth $20,000. Since then, I have bought houses for $2,500. Okay, so every house is not worth $20,000. I have literally bought houses for $2,500. Actual houses with actual deeds and dirt and trash inside that weren't falling down a mountainside. Okay, every house is not worth $20,000, but in the beginning, I thought so. And in the beginning, I paid too much for the house. I paid too much for both of the first houses that I bought. I paid $30,000 at an auction plus closing costs, and that one didn't have... It had a tub in the bathroom, but it didn't have a shower. It didn't have a usable bathroom as we know usable bathrooms today. That one did have central heat and air. But the second one I bought didn't have central heat and air and barely had 2 working bathrooms. So, I've been there, ladies. I've spent my entire life savings buying a house and paying too much for it. So when you tell me you're nervous about paying too much for a house, girl, I have been there. I got the t-shirt and I am still owning that house and making money on that house. Just a couple minutes ago, I got a text on that house. Somebody wanted to buy it from me. for double what I invested in it. And I paid too much, but I'm selling it for double now. That second house, I paid too much for it too. I bought it for sale by owner off of a sign on the highway and an ad I'd seen on Craigslist. And I called and I thought I was a tough negotiator. And I took my whole family over to show them what I was buying for sale by owner. And I was paying cash for it because I was spending my entire life savings and my brother's life savings all in about 6 weeks one summer. I paid too much for that one too because no other investor in town had offered them nearly as much money. And they were so glad that I bought it. This month, I've made almost $4,000 off that house. Because I've got it as an Airbnb house now. We had to get it shored up so that it wouldn't fall down the mountainside. We had to replace every piece of electric in there and bring it up to code. We had to replace every piece of the plumbing system in that house. We had to put a heat and air conditioner unit in it and all the piping and plumbing that goes with that. I have been through it on these two houses. I've learned more lessons on these two houses than I ever hoped to have learned in a 5-year education. Okay? I've had these houses for 6 years this summer. Bought them in the summer of 2013. I paid cash for both those houses and I paid too much for both those houses. No other investor in town was willing to pay what I paid for them. And I know that because half the investors in town were at the auction when I bought the first one. And all the other investors in town had already made lowball offers, what were real lowball offers, and mine was not a lowball offer, on the second one. And the sellers told me on the second one, I'm so glad you bought this because no other investor in town offered us that much money. You paid too much. Sheila says she's learning those lessons on one house now. You got to learn those lessons. And sometimes the best way to learn those lessons is to buy a house and pay too much for it. But there's only one way to guarantee you will never, ever, 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 ever pay too much for a house. And every investor I know, especially every successful investor I know, they all have 1 or 2 deals and they know for a fact they paid too much money for that house, for that apartment complex. They know, looking back, that they paid too much for it. But that's because they know now how much it actually costs to fix it. Or they know now how much they could have offered to buy it. Or they know now how much they could have made if they just assigned it or wholesaled it. Every investor I know, every investor on the internet, every investor in real life, everybody has one property that they paid too much for. And we wear it like a badge of honor. And we share these stories so that you hopefully won't learn these same lessons. Those aren't the only 2 houses that I've paid too much for. But there is one way to guarantee, absolutely foolproof way to double make sure that you are never, ever, ever going to pay too much for a property. Are you ready for it? Do you want this secret? Because I know this secret, and you probably know this secret. And the secret is that the only way you can make sure that you never, ever, 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 ever pay too much a property, and this is guaranteed to work for everybody. I don't care what market you're in, this is going to work for you. The only way to make it ironclad that you never pay too much is if you don't ever buy a house. If you stay on the sidelines, I guarantee you will never pay too much for a property. And I don't make a lot of guarantees, but I'm willing to put my whole portfolio on the line for that one. If you never make an offer, you won't ever be able to pay too much. If you never sign a contract, you'll never pay too much for a property. If you never go all the way to closing, you will never pay too much. If you keep your savings and your retirement in something besides real estate, then I promise, I pinky promise, you'll never pay too much. That's a secret that I'm willing to put it all on the line for. If you stay on the sidelines, you're never going to pay too much. If you stay living in your mom's house and you never buy your own house, then you'll never pay too much. If you stay in your mom's house and you never move out, you just stay there, and after your mom passes, you still stay in the house, and then you live there until you die, and you never, ever, ever move out. You never, ever, ever buy a triplex. You never, ever, ever try house hacking. You never, ever, 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 ever buy a vacant piece of land that you think you can rent. Then that is the way, that is the secret to never paying more than a property's worth. Y'all hear me out there? If you're watching this live, give me a hashtag lady. If you're watching this on the replay, give me a hashtag landlord. If there's 6 of you right now, 6 or 7 of you right now watching this, give me a hashtag lady in the comments if you can understand and agree to what I'm saying here. And if you're watching this later on the replay, give me a hashtag landlord if you're glad you know the secret to never paying more for a property than what it's worth. Because that's the only way you're going to avoid that. I don't know a single real estate investor that doesn't have one property, either in the beginning, the middle, or towards the end of their portfolio, that they didn't pay too much for. And maybe they didn't, maybe they're smarter than me, and maybe they never bought a house that was falling down a mountainside. Maybe they're smarter than I am, and they knew to look and find out if the place had central heat and air. Maybe they live in a part of the country where it's not important that they have central heat and air. I don't know. But maybe they were raised by real estate investors that would actually tell them they're paying too much and not wait till they get to the closing table to find out that they paid too much. But that is the only way you can guarantee that you will never pay too much, is if you just don't play. If you don't get out there and do it. Exactly. Joshua said just hashtag do it. Go do it. Okay, so you paid too much. Big flipping deal. I made $4,000 this month on the second house that I bought that was falling down the mountainside. $4,000 this month. I'm going to make $4,000 next month. I made $4,000 last month. Do I care now that I paid too much? Nope. That house, the first house that I bought at auction, I paid $30,000 plus fees, putting a bathroom in it. I got like 36, 38 grand in it. I've sold it twice for $79,900. I got a guy on the Whitney Buys Houses phone right now texting me all morning wanting to put $10,000 down and buy it for $79,900. I've rented it since November of 2013. I rented it on my brother's birthday in 2013, and we've had it rented ever since then. So it's made $800 a month plus non-refundable option fees. We've already made over 80 grand on that house, and we paid too much for it when we bought it for 30, fixed it 35, 36. We've already made 80 grand on that house, and we paid too much for it. Y'all, there are thousands of ways to make money in real estate. I mean, there are literally, physically, financially, however you want to think about it, probably even spiritually. All right? There are thousands of ways to make money in real estate. And the only way that you're going to guarantee that you never pay too much is if you stay out of the game. If you stay on the bench, if you stay up in the bleachers, if you stay at home while the game's being played over at the stadium, you won't ever run the risk of paying too much. But the moment you decide you're going to get in on the game, you're going to pay too much for one property or another. You might pay too much for a couple different properties. You might be 6 years into it and still be paying too much for properties. I give full offer price on properties. All right, whatever you're asking, I'll give it to you. My uncle will still to this day say those 4 words that I hate to hear. You paid too much. 4 little words are like a dagger into my heart. My daddy will say it too. You paid too much for that. Yeah, well, what have you bought? Right, Dad? I tell him what I paid for this, that, and the other, and he'll say, oh, you paid too much. Yeah, well, I'm up to 15 houses now, and we're making a lot of money, and gonna buy another 15 houses or so in the next couple years. Gonna make a lot of money on those too. Those 4 words used to be a dagger. I used to be terrified of those 4 words. You paid too much. Oh, it made me sick to my stomach. Now it makes me mad. Oh, I'm ready to fight. You tell me I paid too much on a property now? Oh, dude, it is on. I'm going to show you how much money I'm about to make on this investment, because the way I buy houses ain't the same way you buy houses. I'm not writing a check. I'm taking over payments. Somebody's going to give me $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to move into this. You know how much I have invested in this? $10. I make 10 or 15 grand in 30 days on a $10 investment, and somebody wants to tell me that I paid too much for the property? I paid $10. I made $10,000, $15,000. So I paid what the house is worth. Okay. I'm going to have the house for 10 years. How much money am I going to make in those 10 years on this house for giving somebody what the house was worth? You don't have to steal it to make money on it, y'all. You don't have to chop somebody's knees out from under them to get a good deal on a house. You can pay too much for a house and still make money on that house, because there are thousands of ways to make money in real estate. There's no golden rule that says you have to buy low and sell high. My mama told me that sell was a bad 4-letter word because you could only sell it once, but you could rent it every month for the rest of your life, or the rest of the house's life, or the rest of your family's life, or until the termites carry the stupid thing away. We live in a world where it would be awesome to buy low and sell high. But if you're going to get in the game, you got to get in the game. And you got to be ready to pay too much from time to time. If you're going to get that deal done. If you're going to get that next deal done. If you're going to be a buy and hold investor, maybe you paid too much. Maybe you paid the contractor too much. Maybe you paid the vendors too much. Maybe you paid too much for the appliances because the tenants are just going to ruin them. It's not the end of the world if you paid too much, y'all. It's not the end of your portfolio if you pay too much. It's not the end of your investing career if you paid too much. If that would be the case, then I was done before I ever got started. Okay, I paid too much. I'm making money. Okay, I paid more than what somebody else was willing to pay for it. But I got the deal, and I'm the one making money on it now. I've got my goals, I've got my vision, I've got my ideas, and okay, maybe I paid too much. But I'm the one making money on it now, right? I'm the one holding it now, right? I'm the one learning the lessons on it now. And when people tell you that you paid too much, that's just that you paid more than what they were willing to pay. That doesn't mean you actually paid too much. And I don't tell my girls, are you sure? Is that it? Are you paying too much? I don't say that to my girls, because I know that if they get this deal under contract, I know if they put this deal out there, I know if they keep this deal for 5, 10, 15 years, they're not going to pay too much. In fact, Jason uses this as an example all the time. My husband uses this as an example. Technically, everybody who has ever bought a house with a mortgage has paid too much. You know why? Because after you pay that thing off after 30 years, you've probably paid double. Yeah, you signed the line to buy it for 120, 150, 250, 300, 400. By the time you pay that thing off and taxes and interest and fees and closing costs and all that stuff over 30 years, have you ever calculated how much you actually paid for that 120, 150, $400,000 house? Because I bet you actually paid twice as much. So if that's the case, everybody has already paid too much for their property, because not many people buying properties for cash and not paying interest through the banks. Hell, even if I do one of my lease options, I'm still taking over somebody's mortgage payment. And if they agreed to pay too much, then I'm paying too much. You ever thought about that? Those 4 words used to terrify me, used to hurt my feelings, because I wanted to be smart and I wanted to be a successful real estate investor, and I wanted to do amazing things, and I wanted to be rich with real estate, and I went broke trying to get rich in real estate before I figured out creative real estate. Those four words, I used to avoid them like the plague. I did not want anybody to tell me that I'd made a bad deal or that you paid too much. It would terrify me. But then one day I realized that everybody's already paid too much. And this is just the value that we're assigning to this chunk of dirt attached to a deed right now, today, in this lifetime. 50 years ago, we would have all paid different amounts. 50 years in the future, we're all going to be paying different amounts. And on the houses that I have right now that I paid too much for, in 50 years, I may be so glad that I paid too much for those houses. I'm already 6 years in, super glad that I paid too much for those properties, because I'm the one holding them. I'm the one borrowing against them. I'm the one making passive income cash flow off those houses that I bought 6 years ago. I'm sitting in Florida right now. I've been here for 3 weeks. I don't live in Florida. I live in Tennessee. My houses are in Tennessee. I've been on a 3-week vacation because 6 years ago I paid too much for some houses. And I figured out how to make money. I figured out how to get my investment back. I figured out how to make an extra $4,000 a month on a house that I owned free and clear. Every investor I know has paid too much for a house. Every investor I know has ended up going over budget on one flip or another. Every investor I know has gone through these growth spurts. But I want to encourage you not to let those 4 words stop you. When I was new and I was terrified, I dropped you. I was new and I was terrified that my dad or my uncle or my boyfriend or my brother, one of my men, I was terrified that they would tell me, you paid too much. Because then I would feel like I was letting them down. But now I know that I really would have been letting them down if I would have listened to them and stopped. If I would have heard those 4 words, you paid too much. If I would have heard those 4 words and thrown a 5th word in, it would have been stop. If I would have stopped back then, I wouldn't be on a 3-week vacation right now. If I'd stopped back then, I wouldn't have 15 houses now. I wouldn't have 19 apartment units now. I wouldn't have random vacant pieces of land all across East Tennessee that I can't even keep up with now. I would have stopped. I would have stopped all my momentum. I would have stopped all of my goals. I would have stopped all of my flow. I would have stopped everything. And if I had stopped with those 4 words back in 2013, most of y'all wouldn't give 2 flips about who I am and how I can help you. If I would have let those 4 words stop me, y'all wouldn't be getting your deals done. Y'all wouldn't be out there ignoring those 4 words from your people if I had stopped. y'all wouldn't be out there getting deals and flipping houses and buying duplexes and going on trips and helping sellers in your neighborhood. See, it's all connected. We're all helping each other. When I do my deals, it helps you do your deals. When you do your deals, it helps me do my deals. And when we can all just realize that those are just 4 words and that they don't need to hurt our feelings, then we can get more deals done. Because so what? We paid too much. If you could go back to 1987 and buy 4 houses in the neighborhood you grew up in or the neighborhood you were living in 1987, how much would you pay for those properties? Probably too much. I graduated high school in 2003 and our neighborhood was pretty hot. Mom and Dad sold our house. We had 10 acres in a rental house next door. We had about 12 acres total with 2 houses and a barn and all sorts of stuff. And they sold it and they developed that property into like 35 different houses. And I remember when Mom and Dad sold that, it's the only piece of property she's ever sold in her life. I remember the conversation was, wow, that developer paid too much. No, he didn't. He made millions of dollars. If I could go back to 2003 and buy 10 houses in our neighborhood for what they were asking in 2003, I would be a millionaire. Technically, I am already, but I would be like multi. You can't go back to 1987, though, and buy a bunch of houses. You can't go back to 2003 and buy a bunch of houses. Y'all can't go back to 2018 and buy a bunch of houses. You're dealing with 2019 right now. In 5 months, you're going to be dealing with 2020. So in 2027 and in 2035, are you going to be glad that you paid too much in 2019 for a house? Or are you going to be kicking yourself that you should have bought that? You should have kept that. Don't let those 4 words stop you. You can't go back in time and redo those deals, but you can do your deals right now. Don't let 4 little words add a 5th one and a stop sign. Keep going, girls. Do your deals. The only way to avoid paying too much is to stay on the sidelines, to stay stuck in your head, or to stay at home instead of getting out and playing this game. Because it's a game. And if you look at the price like a score, if you look at your P&L statement like it's a score on a game, if you look at your bank account like it's a score in a game, instead of attaching your worth to it, then it's a lot more fun and you realize that it's a game. Sometimes you're winning, sometimes you're losing, but you can always come back and score another touchdown. You can always do another deal. You can always close another seller. You can always find a new tenant buyer. It's a game. And it's a really fun game. It's a very lucrative game. It's a very fast game that feels like it's a really slow game until it is really fast. But y'all get out there. If you pay too much, whatever. We'll figure it out. If you pay too much, we'll just keep it longer until we can make money on it. If you pay too much to flip it, we'll just hold it longer. Don't be afraid to pay too much. If you stay scared of paying too much, you'll never get a deal done. You'll never get your next deal done. And you'll never be able to wear that deal like a badge of honor that you paid too much. You will live to see another day if you pay too much. I promise. And you won't make those mistakes again. I haven't bought any other houses falling down a mountainside. I have bought more houses that didn't have central heat and air, but I knew it and I lowered my price. Okay? And I've bought houses since then that I paid too much for. But I got them, and they make me money every single month. And they've allowed me to grow and scale and leverage my portfolio. I ain't scared of paying too much, because in 10 years, when I still have that thing and it's still puking out money on me, that's my money coming in. Whoever says I paid too much for it, they just jealous because they didn't pay for it. Because they didn't have the brass ovaries to pay for it. They didn't have the guts to sign the dotted line. You do. And I'm super proud of you. If you pay too much, it's fine. We've all been there. The worst thing you can do is not do the deal for fear that you'll pay too much. Don't do that, y'all. Get out there and play the game. Get off the sidelines. Get out of your house. Get in the stadium. Let's have some fun, girls. You'll be glad in 10 or 15 years that you did the deal. And if you only have one deal that you paid too much for out of 15 or 30 deals, you are winning. Okay? There's thousands of ways to make money out there. You can pay too much for a property and still make money. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here for y'all. I love y'all. I'm super proud of you. Keep doing those deals and don't worry about those 4 little words. Because the only way to avoid them is to stay out of the game. Let's go get those deals, girls. Bye, y'all.